The death of a beloved icon, Pokemon executives racing to take advantage, the imprisonment of an author. This is the story of Pokemon's greatest failure. It flopped so hard we can almost guarantee you've never heard it before. And it all stems from a plan that was supposed to make the Pokemon Company billions, but the only thing it ended up earning was embarrassment. Understandably, the company's not too keen on preserving the story or its fruits, but today we're gonna tell it, and upload all that remains to the Internet Archive for preservation. This is the story of Pikachu Meets the Press. It's a bizarre tale, and as is often the case on this channel, some folks might not believe it. So right off the bat, we're gonna outline our sources to back it all up. To get the facts, we had to translate a good chunk of a 600-page Japanese book called Pokemon Story, which was co-authored by Masakazu Kubo, who behind the scenes was the most important Pokemon executive you've probably never heard of. In Japan, he is often called the father of Pokemon. Back in the earliest days of the franchise, he was the guy promoting it in magazines like CoroCoro, helping Pokemon get a head start when no one else cared. His company Shogakukan owns a lot of Pokemon's printing and animation rights, and Kubo himself was executive producer of the early movies and anime. His book Pokemon Story is an extremely detailed account of Pokemon as a business, advertising budgets, marketing strategies, the kind of stuff Poketubers don't usually cover. Pokemon Story is where a lot of this video's info comes from, along with bits and pieces from various other old Japanese magazines. Okay, so with all that sourcing made clear, let's get this tale unfurled. It was the year 2000, the dawn of the Pokemon era, but the sun was also setting on the era of a comic strip called Peanuts. Circulating in over 2,000 newspapers reaching hundreds of millions of readers, Charlie Brown and his dog Snoopy were up there with Mickey Mouse as some of the most recognized and beloved characters of all time. With the first comic written by Charles Schulz in 1950, some people called Peanuts the longest story ever told by one human being. It had been adapted into movies, TV shows, toys, everything Pokemon was now becoming. But tragically, in early 2000, Charles Schulz was dying of cancer. His comic writing days were over. Pokemon's corporate leaders saw an opening, so they all got together to work out how to take his place. According to Pokemon Story, with Snoopy now finished, of the 2,000 newspapers across America, at least 200 now had empty pages that urgently need filling. The earnings from serialization are small, but the royalties from compilation books are considerable, and Pokemon can copy the path of Peanuts. Greeting millions of Americans in their homes every morning was a profitable marketing opportunity. But with Charles Schulz on his deathbed, the clock was ticking. Pokemon Company President Tsunekazu Ishihara asked, "How much power do these newspapers have?" Someone answered, "They come out daily, so it's beyond measure. We don't want to miss this window of opportunity. Now's the perfect timing, but it's coming down to the wire." The execs ultimately decided, even if the comic itself didn't make much money, the exposure was equivalent to $2 billion worth of advertising. That was just for 200 newspapers. Presumably, if they could take all 2,000 papers currently putting out Peanuts, it'd be worth billions more. Next to the games, anime, and trading cards, these comics would be Pokemon's fourth pillar holding up their plan to win the West. 1 week after that meeting, Charles Schulz was dead. The Pokemon Company had to act fast. To write the comic, they hired Gerard Jones. Back in 2000, he was a respected author working for both of the big two, Marvel and DC Comics, writing stuff like Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man, plus the English versions of Pokemon Adventures and Dragon Ball. So on paper at least, Jones probably seemed like the perfect guy for the job. To do the art, they got Ashura Benimaru Ito. Throughout the 90s, he'd done Super Metroid comics, Earthbound, Star Fox comics, again, seemingly the best man for the job. He also did some miscellaneous Pokemon art here and there, with Pokemon Snap standing out as some of his best. Ashura was an executive at Creatures Inc., co-owner of the Pokemon brand, and objectively the organization's quirkiest personality. He's really into wearing leopard skin clothes, sometimes with a tail, even to business meetings. To quote the late great Satoru Iwata, "Things always get weird when Ashura shows up." He was always doing stuff like making CG models of himself in leopard skins, growling, printed them out as stickers, and handed them out to everyone in his office. Quirky though he may be, Ashura's literally a rock star, not to mention a hell of an artist. With seasoned veterans like Jones and Ashura behind the wheel, the new Pokemon comic was primed for success. But before we dive further into this story, a word from this video's sponsor, Persona 3 Reload. Persona 3 Reload is a turn-based RPG and reimagining of the pivotal game in the Persona series. Persona 3 Reload has a self-contained story, and now with its faithfully rebuilt modern graphics and quality-of-life improvements, it's a great place to jump into the series. The game's modern-day alternate universe setting creates a recognizable and unnerving atmosphere that blurs the boundaries between the ordinary and the supernatural, all while the game explores the human psyche and themes of death, morality, and the meaning of life. Persona 3 Reload's intense turn-based battles will have you harnessing the unique strengths of your Persona repertoire to gain the upper hand. Planning your party's actions and thinking up new strategies will be vital for overcoming the game's ever-increasing challenges. In Persona 3 Reload, you'll forge deep social connections, engage in lively and strategic battles, and unravel a gripping story that'll have you hooked. And if you're a Persona 3 veteran, Reload has tons of new content like new side stories and new personas. For all this and more, check out Persona 3 Reload, available for pre-order right now, and launches February 2nd, 2024 on Xbox Series X and S, Xbox One, Windows, Steam, PlayStation 5, and PlayStation 4. Now back to Pokemon. As well as Jones and Ashura, bringing up the rear was an experienced three-person editorial team, along with additional support from Nintendo, Creatures Inc., Viz, and Creators Syndicate. What could possibly go wrong? The first strip debuted a few months later, starring Ash, Misty, and Pikachu on their first day of school. Yeah, they go to actual school, where they learn history and US government. We'll circle back to that later. Over its run, Brock, Ash's mom, and Gary showed up as regular characters too, along with some Pokemon more than others, especially Pikachu and Metapod. Color comics on Sunday, black and white the rest of the week. The black and whites each had a hidden Pokemon, like this one for example. Can you spot the hidden Magnemite? It's right here. Sunday comics often had puzzles attached, like Poke word searches or Who's That Pokemon type stuff. Now's probably a good time to mention, our longtime friend and art preservationist HiResPokemon scanned every single strip in high resolution for us. So huge thanks to that legend. And there'll be a download link in this video's description if you want to read them all and do the puzzles yourself. A lot of storylines were spread out over a week or two's worth of newspapers, then they were finished, like Ash preparing for a battle against Gary and getting beat, for example. Other stories were peppered throughout the whole series, as sort of the main recurring plot lines, like Misty crushing on Ash, which peaked on Valentine's with a week of Misty badgering him for a romantic gesture. Another was Brock's horniness, similar to the kind of horndogging you see in the anime, chasing around Misty's sisters, random women, stuff like that. One of the more memorable strips has Brock practicing his flirting skills with his Vulpix, who's clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Then there's one where Ditto transforms into a hot chick, Brock catcalls at her, then even after it's exposed as Ditto, Brock's still down for it. But probably the most original and extensive recurring plot was the one devoted to Metapod, who's very philosophical and depressed because of his immobility. The problem was, they weren't very funny, or even entertaining. With very few exceptions, the comics were just plain bad. On this channel, we usually leave our opinions aside, but most of y'all will never read the comics outside of this video. So we hope you'll forgive us for feeling we need to slip on our reviewer hats. And hey, our criticisms line up with a lot of the critiques levied back in the day. But we know what's good or bad is subjective and a matter of taste. So here, we'll let you make up your own mind while we read one of the Metapod strips. Psyduck says, "Metapod, how can you enjoy being ambivalent? It makes my head hurt." Metapod replies, "But Psyduck, ambivalence frees me from the pressure of having to be sure about my choices. Of course, I might be happier if I was sure of some things. I guess I'm just ambivalent about ambivalence." Then Psyduck hams it up for the camera. Unfunniness aside, most kids wouldn't even know what ambivalence means. But there's a lot of y'all watching, and maybe some of you thought that was hilarious. So let's do one more. Here's Ash and his mom watching TV. The news is talking about how the stock market's doing, the Slovakian embassy, and the presidential inauguration. When it switches over to a Pokemon battle, Ash takes out his earplugs and proclaims, "The secret to life is knowing when to pull out the earplugs." What is funny is this entire thing was the Pokemon Company's attempt to win over American adults. Maybe that explains the sometimes high-level vocabulary. Talking to Japanese Nintendo Online magazine in 2000, the so-called father of Pokemon, Masakazu Kubo, explained the brand's next big step for global dominance. Quote, "What I'm most intrigued by now is the expansion into newspapers in America. If it's a success, Pokemon will be like peanuts. Up till now, all the creativity behind Pokemon came from Japan, but now Americans are coming up with their own ideas to expand the Pokemon brand in entirely new ways. Getting into newspapers will be the first time Pokemon culture is presented as something for adults. I'm incredibly excited about it." Maybe this targeting of adults explains why the comics put so much focus on Ash's mom, but honestly, these strips were more likely to make adults hate Pokemon and think it's stupid. We could read you a bunch of them, but we'll just take a quick look at two. Ash's mom says, "That does it. My mind is set. I won't let Ash's Pokemon get to me anymore." Then Charmander's raising hell in the background. Mom makes an exasperated face, looks at the reader, and says, "Oh look, my curtains are on fire. Isn't that amusing? Ha, ha." Here's another. Mom relaxing on the couch. She says, a whole hour gone by and Ash's Pokemon haven't gotten on my nerves the least little bit. I'll have to get up at 3 a.m. more often." Besides being not funny, these strips make Pokemon look annoying as hell. According to the guy writing them, Gerard Jones, he wasn't much of a Pokemon fan himself. He got a lot of his Poke knowledge from his son Nicky, even though Nicky's quote allegiance had shifted to the competition. We take that to mean the Jones kid used to like Pokemon, but now he was on Team Digimon. Or maybe he meant Yu-Gi-Oh! Regardless, the author's lack of Poke experience shines through in his work. Stuff like referring to the Orange Islands simply as Orange Island, as if there's only one. Or when Misty says her Staryu evolved from rigorous training, when Staryu actually evolves via Waterstone. Also, Ash and friends have to go to school. Not Pokemon school, but like actual school, where he learns about the 14th Amendment and the Electoral College. Very strange. And maybe this is getting into nitpicking territory, but a lot of the Find the Pokemon puzzles were stupidly easy, especially if they're supposed to be for adults. Here, try one out for yourself. Can you find Oduo? There it is. How about Ninetales? Yep, you got it. Also, this Connect the Dots Sunday puzzle's supposed to give us a Pokemon. Here's the solution they printed a week later. It doesn't look like any Pokemon we can think of. Deformed Meowth, maybe? And also, look, we love Ashura Ito. Very skilled artist, love his work. But it seems like he was trying to mesh his distinctive art style with what he thought American funny papers were supposed to look like. And a lot of the time, the results were just not great. Especially when Pikachu winks at the reader. It's a little funky. Also, his work here looks a bit rushed. A lot of Sunday strips fail to fill in pieces of the background, leaving empty space where there should have been color. In Pokemon Story, Ishihara and the other execs talk about how they're worried the comic's quality will suffer because they've got a rush while Charles Schultz is on his deathbed. In that same meeting mentioned earlier, someone says, "We want very much to put out good content, but we don't have time. We don't want to miss this window of opportunity." Then Kubo says, "We can do it. Those restrictions will be motivation. We already have the characters. We have the game story. We aren't starting from scratch." He wasn't wrong. If history's shown anything, it's that virtually any product with Pokemon stamped on it's guaranteed to print money. Unfortunately for those execs, this comic was so bad it managed to be the exception. Sometimes the story thread took weeks to get to the punchline, but the payoff was rarely worth the wait. One example, after Ash loses his battle against Gary, Clefairy spends 3 weeks blaming itself for the defeat. Hiding in a cupboard, feeling insecure, crying, seeking reassurance, it just keeps going. Eventually, Ash's other Pokemon throw a party to cheer it up, but by then the reader's probably forgotten why Clefairy was even depressed in the first place. The comic seems conscious of that fact. The in-strip characters can't remember either. Then Bulbasaur turns to the audience and says, "Too bad we didn't clip and save those strips." The comic was cancelled almost immediately afterwards. Team Rocket make their first and only appearance in the final installment. Then Ash tells the reader, "Well, I guess we won't be seeing you in the funny papers anymore." So, long story short, it was bad. It failed to capture the hearts of American adults and probably didn't do much for the kids either. It certainly didn't bring in the billions of dollars the execs expected. All told, it only ran for 6 months before cancellation, from September 2000 to March 2001. Somehow, the story gets even worse though. Years later, the comic's author Gerard Jones was arrested for possession and distribution of, well, we don't want to get demonetized. Let's just say it wasn't comics, but it was the kind of kiddie material that lands you in federal prison. A lot of it, actually. It had been going on for years. He uploaded some to a private YouTube channel, and it was YouTube themselves who called the cops. Jones did his time, and he's a free man nowadays. We could have reached out to him for some behind-the-scenes info like we usually do in our videos, but this time, we're good. With the Pokemon comic ending in abject failure, and its author's crimes disgracing its already tarnished legacy, it's no wonder the Pokemon company never acknowledges it. Fans don't seem interested in carrying its flag either. We couldn't find a single YouTube video about it, or even on this day in Pokemon history kind of tweets that are common for every other corner of the franchise. In fact, the last time anyone tweeted about it at all was over a year ago, from some guy lamenting that no one ever talks about it. Well, here you go, Jimmy. And like we said before, if you folks at home want to trot down memory lane, as of today, the entire series is freely available on Internet Archive. We've been kind of brutal, but now with our reviewer hats off and our preservationist hat slipped back on, there's probably some folks with nostalgia for Pikachu Meets the Press. So for those folks, we hope y'all can still enjoy them. Links down below. We've got another weird page in Pokemon history just like this one coming up soon. Even weirder, actually. So subscribe if you don't want to miss it. If you're looking for something to watch right now though, did you also know there was a bizarre Russian Pokédex printed around the same time as this comic? It's now available in English, so click the video on screen if you want to see it. Special thanks to HiResPokemon, our translator Jacob, and proofreader SnorlaxMonster, who's a Bulbapedia administrator. And of course, thank you for watching. See you next time.